We've all heard of rental nightmares. Maybe you've experienced that or you know someone that has. But today we're going to be talking about managing your own rental properties or hiring a property manager. Which way should you go? What are some of the things to think about? So stay tuned to this episode of The Den. The Den, powered by the Lyons Group, a show dedicated to exploring hot topics in real estate, local happenings, and industry trends. We're a small team of professionals approaching $400 million in sales and nearly 2,000 local transactions. You're listening to time-tested experts and industry leaders. Here's a refreshing look at real estate happenings and more. Welcome to The Den. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of The Den. My name is Ben Lyons, and I'm your host. And today we're going to be talking about your rentals. If you have a rental or thinking about getting a rental, how do you manage that? Or should you hire a property manager? We're going to discuss that and more. Before I get to that, let's meet our fellow hosts of the Lyons Group, my friends, my co-hosts, my partners. To my left, Paul, hand me the rockberry, Melissa, let's go Glasgow, Aspen, the Ninja Groen, and Shannon, the boss. Martin Martinez. Again, my name is Ben Lyons, and I'm your host for today's episode. So we have all had experiences. Well, I shouldn't say all of us. I mean, I know I've had some rental nightmares over the years with some tenants that are a little unruly. But let's talk about that today. Let's talk about what you should think about when you're renting a property that you own. And does it behoove you to hire a property manager? So we're going to discuss that. Melissa, let's start with you today. I love that.
With me because I'm the only person who's never had a rental.
This is great. This is great because it is a perspective from someone who is outside of the rental arena a little bit. But you do know people that have rental properties. I do. And I want to hear your thoughts today about if you were going to go into property management or manage your own property, what were some of the things that you'd be thinking about in that regard?
For myself, I would probably hold off on getting a property manager. If I'm only doing one door, that's something that I think that, anybody could handle, depending on what else I'm doing at the time. If I'm very busy with work or family or whatever, I might not have the time to dedicate to that property. I personally would hire a property manager if I've got several doors and more, because my money is better spent letting a property manager deal with the little day-to-day things on my behalf.
The details of those. But I think that's a really good point in the sense that if you want to understand what's going on with your property, if you have one unit, maybe you go through the process so you can understand how to deal with a tenant, what it takes, what kind of agreements you need to have, how to handle the application process.
Right.
And then at a certain point where you go, okay, maybe I have 2 or 3 or maybe a dozen rentals or 2 dozen rentals, then you can bring on the property manager. Yeah. What would be some of the concerns you would have right out of the gate trying to manage your own property?
My concerns would be maintenance. Who's going to maintain it? Because that's a major thing.
Yeah, you're not going to get your weed eater out there.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I just saw a TikTok yesterday of this woman complaining that her landlord was weeding the flower beds. And that post did not go the way she wanted it.
Oh, no.
Because everybody was like, oh, yeah, God forbid a property owner is taking care of their own property, type of thing.
Sure. So you would be looking at different avenues to hire people out.
For maintenance type of things. You know what I mean? You can't be a pushover. If you are letting somebody else live in your property, you cannot be a pushover. You have to get your bills paid. The property has to be maintained, and that cannot happen if somebody is essentially squatting and being a freeloader. It's not your responsibility to house somebody on your dime. Yeah. So and that's the hard part, I think, that I would have.
Really hard, because I've had tenants that have lost their uncle like 6 times.
Right.
Right. And, I can't pay rent this month. We got to go out here for our funeral, for whatever else. And so, when I first started out, that was always hard for me because it's hard to delineate who's telling the truth and who's not.
You want to be empathetic to another person, but at what point in time are you actually being taken advantage of?
Sure. So that would be one of your biggest concerns.
That would be my biggest concern.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who's going to take care of the property? Probably not going to be me because I don't have skills. So I'm going to be paying somebody. And who's going to be the bad guy when it comes down to it.
Yeah, because you got to wear all those hats if you're managing your own property. Aspen, what are your thoughts? I know you obviously have rentals in a big spectrum. You have short-term rentals and long-term rentals. Let's talk about the long-term rentals right now. How do you approach tenants, the tenant situation? Do you have an application process that you go through? What are some of the thoughts? Share some ideas there.
Yeah, so we do a background check and a credit check, and I don't discriminate based on credit. I feel like that's why most people are renting, but they do have to have a consistent job, and I just have to meet with them and feel like we get a good feeling. And there is a application fee. It doesn't go to me. It just goes to the program. But I do, if I decide to go with that person, I take it off their first month's rent. So I think it also kind of deters people just from applying to apply. They actually have to, it's like $35. They have to actually take the first step to apply.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. And that speaks volumes, because if people can't even do that little thing, I mean, are they a tenant you want in your property? So what are some of the things that you really look for in a tenant? Let's say you have 4 or 5 tenants that are applying for a property. What are some of the things you really look for, and some of the things that are big red flags?
Evictions are the biggest red flag, and you have to do a little bit deeper dive to find that. But that to me is almost a hard stop, unless it was, because they stay on your record for so long. But if it was, 7-10 years ago, that's fine. And they've been good since then. I don't really care then. Again, I don't really care about credit. They do have to have a consistent job, and I have to know all the adults that are living in the house, and they all have to be on the agreement. I do a check on all of them. They can do it all on one. So we can't have anyone that's not supposed to be in the house living in the house, not like a guest. But those are kind of my biggest things, is if they're just being upfront from the beginning. I don't do pets in mine. So that's like a deal breaker right there. I've had people sneak pets in, and it's just gross every time.
Yeah. What about goldfish?
No.
Yeah. Yeah. And I thought about that before. I was like, oh, you can have a fish. But then I was thinking, that's a 100-gallon tank or whatever. If that thing exploded or someone threw a baseball through it or something, then you'd have a mess. I mean, and it wouldn't smell good. I mean, they usually don't take care of them. But
no, so no pets. That's kind of a hard stop. I used to be a little bit more lenient on that, but it just never has turned out good. I'm actually more lenient on that for my short-term rentals than I am for my long-term rentals.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, speak to that a little bit.
I feel like short-term rentals are a little bit easier. You can have people trash the house. It's happened a few times, but for the most part, you're going in there, in a matter of a few days. So there's only really so much that can happen in a few days. I don't mind certain pets, but there's some properties where it doesn't make sense, and they can't be on the furniture, can't be on the beds. That I do have some rules, and they have to bring everything for them. And some of my properties aren't fenced. So some of them are like by the river, or there was one in Durango that wasn't fenced. It was by like highway, but it was a big lot. So just reminding people that they need to bring all their own things.
Yeah. And keep them on a leash and all that jazz. Yeah. Yep.
And they can't leave them in the property if they leave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because a cat goes crazy and you got scratch marks everywhere or whatever else. Paul, I know.
What?
Listen, we can't pull doors off of units anymore and say, you haven't
get out.
Yeah, get out. That's not allowed anymore. Okay.
You don't need a key.
You can get the things out there and cut the electricity. You can't do that. But in all seriousness,
just don't get caught.
That's right. That. Yeah, that's right.
I love all my tenants.
Yeah. Talk to me about some of the ways you handle maybe some difficult tenants that have got in. You got in under a good, agreement with them, and then they just maybe turned south, or they've had some financial troubles, or how do you deal with people like that?
Well, not to give out any particulars or any names or anything like that, but I have done in the past somebody that is a little bit strapped for cash at the time, do like a payment plan on the deposit. I just make sure that they can pay the monthly payments. I do the background checks. I do pretty much all the same stuff Aspen was talking about. On the back end, I have had some negotiations that I've had to do. I don't necessarily get non-payment, but what I get is they didn't pay their utility bill. Then all of a sudden it falls back on me. Then I'm charging it back to them and those types of things. Or I get a lot, since I own a trailer park, is parking too many vehicles or parking vehicles that you're working on. And it's become a project that goes over a few months. And I've made a decision that eviction is, the last resort, I guess. But my thing is, if I can figure out a way, because sometimes getting them out is more of a headache than just working a deal with them, giving them a month to figure it out or something like that, as opposed to going through the eviction process and starting all over with somebody else.
Yeah. I mean, that's a fair point, because turnover is costly. It costs you a lot of money to go through, repaint, replace flooring, the time between a tenant moving out and a new tenant moving in. It costs money. There's a lot of variables there. So it behooves you to work with a tenant that's there, especially if they're coming from a place of, I want to make this right. I just got a little bit behind or whatever else. But that's to your point, Melissa, you have to delineate between people pulling your chain or are they in serious need of some help.
Well, and that's why I prefer to be my own property manager at this point. I know there's some point if, I think everybody that does rentals knows when it's too much for them. They have too many and they need some help. Either they hire somebody or they bring on a property manager. I'm not quite there yet. And I like to be able to negotiate with the tenants, understand what's going on. Another thing that I would like to go into properties about twice a year because you find out if you don't ever go in, and I've heard horror stories. I'm sure Shannon's going to share hers today. Yeah. If you don't go in, every once in a while, you find out that the house has been gutted, or if you're not going to sell it to them, it's going to cost you probably the whole value of the house again.
Well, or there's been a leak that they just haven't told you about because they didn't want to bother you, or maybe they're behind on rent. They didn't want to have the other conversation.
They brought the pets in. Now they've destroyed the house.
Yeah.
Or your yard.
Yeah.
All those costly things.
Oh, man, that could get ugly. And speaking of that.
Let's not speak of it.
No, let's not speak of it. Let's not speak of it. No, I'm just teasing with you, Shannon. I know we've all had difficult times over the years with tenants, but talk to me about, maybe give us an example of what you faced and then also what you could have done differently in a situation that may have been like, ooh, man, I could have handled that differently, or I should have done taken some different precautions.
I've definitely learned a lot. I think at this point, I need to realize that you treat it as a business, that you don't treat it as, a charity or something personal. That's been a big problem of mine over the years, which for me is why I would definitely get a property manager, because I need somebody on the outside. I need somebody in that house that I don't know. And I need somebody in that house that somebody else is managing and watching and being the bad guy when you have to be the bad guy. I've had a couple of experiences, and I will say all of it comes down to me and my lack of just handling my business. That was my biggest problem.
I wouldn't put it solely on you. There's another party in that. There's a tenant.
Sure.
But could you have done some things there? Tell us a little bit about.
I could have done a lot different. So the first time I rented, I had a family of 5. And they had fallen on some hard times, and they had to move out of their property because they had a death in the family, and that person was actually, I'm assuming, was the actual owner of the property. So they moved into a rental property, and they were there less than 30 days when they got a notice on the door that the house was going into foreclosure. Somebody had taken their first and last month's rent, deposit, everything, and put them in there, and then wouldn't return their call. And so they just took them for every penny they had. And they had 3 children. And, we at the time had a property coming available. And so I said, you know what, let's just get in there. Don't worry about it. He was a friend of a friend. Let's just get in there and, we'll work out some details later, as long as you're kind of covering the bills. I figured they'd get on their feet and would find a way forward. That was my biggest mistake, is assuming that somebody would be grateful for an opportunity and be someone I could work with. They weren't. They were there for 8 years. They were almost squatters. They would pay every now and again. They would catch up, and they wouldn't pay for months and didn't maintain the property. There was, always an excuse. Definitely by the time I got the property back, I did end up doing about $25,000 in renovations on the property. It needed everything. Every door had a hole in it. The flooring was destroyed. The back deck had been ripped off the house. I mean, you name it. It was everything. Everything in that house was damaged. There was water leaks. They had some tiles in the shower fall off, didn't take care of it, didn't call, didn't say a word, and just kept showering in it. So it just ran through the wall and then downstairs, and then, dropped the ceiling down in the downstairs. Things like that. It was pretty absurd. My fault. I should have stopped that a lot earlier. Sometimes I have a hard time when someone is struggling. I've struggled, know, and so, you want to be kind to people. So I ended up doing all those repairs, and I had a friend reach out on Facebook and said, anybody know of a rental property? I'm moving back to town. She's a single mom, just freshly divorced, had 3 kids. And I said, you know what? You'd be a perfect fit. We're renovating the whole thing. It's going to be great. She really didn't have market value for what the price I could have gotten on the home. But I was okay with that because she was a neighbor of mine for years. So I knew how she kept her house. I felt comfortable with it. And I said, that's okay. If what you can pay is going to be ample enough. We're still making some money on it. And, I'd feel good with you being in there. Well, that didn't go so well either. The payment stayed on track for about the first year. And then when COVID started, it was, well, you got a moratorium, you can't throw people out. So, and of course she had another child on the way at that point, quit paying. I mean, pretty soon I basically housed her and her single pregnant mom with 3 kids, which I'm not going to throw out, because that was a very difficult situation for me. I housed them for, 3 years, basically 3 years. I paid utilities because she never put them in her name. So I paid the utilities. I paid the mortgage. Finally, at the point where I was looking for a rental for my son and his family, I said, I can't even find a rental property. And I thought, why am I paying for one and looking for one for my child? And I finally reached out and said, look, this is just enough. I can do no more for you. Like there is just no more I can do for you. And we're not going to get back on track. And if you will just leave kindly without me having to do an eviction or anything, I will not put it on your record. I just leave. And I can put my kids in here, and then at least I'm paying for it for a good cause at this point, is my thought. And that didn't even go well. Then I was the bad guy for throwing out a single mom that was pregnant with no job. And then I was the bad guy because, how's she supposed to find a rental? Yeah. And, so, for me, I would say arm's length, let somebody else do that. It is a business. I can't do that, unfortunately. I think that's my biggest problem.
You are a poster child for a property manager.
Right.
I mean, honestly,
exactly, yes.
This is one of those things because, and it really stems back to what Melissa said originally, which was, your heartstrings. And I'm give yourself some grace because it has happened to me and I have gone years with tenants and allowed them to, and it's just the heartstrings that get pulled and you want to do what you can. But at a certain point, they are not making their home a priority.
Correct.
And so then it's like, well, why am I making it a priority and I'm losing money on this?
Right.
And that's a hard thing to swallow.
I was definitely at the end of that after, bills and everything in there. I was definitely after those 3 years, not just what, when you talk about paying your bills, but what I actually was in debt was well over, $10,000, $15,000.
Yeah.
And you just think, you just can't do enough for some people. And, and of course, in the end, I've heard a little bad mouthing behind my back about it, because, who would do that to, a poor mom?
Sure.
Well, I don't know who would do that to poor me.
Yeah.
I started to feel sorry for me at this point.
Sure.
Well, I think that's something too, as realtors, is we're very vocal about advocating for property owner rights.
Exactly.
And
everyone should be able to have a home.
Everybody, yes. And if you're a landlord and you're renting it out, you're a property owner and you have rights too.
That's right.
And there are some states where the tenants have above and beyond way more rights than the property owner does.
Exactly.
Which is very frightening.
It's unfair.
But that's something that I know everybody sitting at this table is very involved with, getting to know our legislation and protecting property owner rights.
Yeah. Because there's tenant rights and there's property owner rights. And some states are more tenant heavy rights and some are the opposite. Yeah. And you got to have a good balance because there's a reason why, and Aspen, you had said this a long time ago, there's a reason why there's slumlord rules. There's a term slumlord, right? Because some owners take advantage of their tenants and don't do the things that they're supposed to do. And the opposite side of that coin is that there are tenants that far exceed their rights and then impose on the owner's rights, which makes it a difficult situation.
And everybody should know the rights, whether you're a tenant or an owner.
Exactly. Yeah. And stand up for them. Yeah. I mean, that's really what I should have done. I never should have allowed this kind of stuff to go on as long as I did with these two
but you learn.
tenants.
Right? Yeah, that's right.
Like it's a learning point.
Yeah. No, I definitely think at this point, I just need a property manager. I mean, at this point, I have proven to myself that, I am clearly just too much of a bleeding heart. If somebody's on a hard time, I'm there, and that's not always a wise financial decision. I still think you can help people and be a good person, but you can also make a good sound decision too. Because at the end of the day, those rental properties are retirement, So at this point, they don't really have to make money for me. They just have to pay for themselves until the point where they really become my income stream. I would love for them to be an income stream right now too, But I mean, you gotta be smart too.
Well, and I tell owners this, I say, well, we can just move out of this and move, we'll buy another home and we'll keep this. Maybe the market's not good right now. We can't sell it for what we want to. And I stop them and I say, do you want to be in the property management business, either you managing it or hiring a property manager, because all you're doing is kicking that can down the road. If you want to be in the business, in the investment business with real estate, wonderful. We welcome that. But if you don't want to be doing that, then let's get the home sold.
Yeah.
Let's not go there by default, because we've seen.
Or get somebody to do the job for you.
Yeah.
I think
Get somebody to
Shannon
do the
made
property management for
I think
you.
you made a good point too. Like, it's a retirement thing for us, and that's not how everyone's retirement is. Some people have traditional retirement, and they might not. I don't really think it makes sense to have one rental property or even 3 or 4. It kind of, the numbers just don't really make sense, because especially like Melissa said, me and Bryson, my husband, we have all the hats for everything. We do everything ourselves right now, probably not forever, but for me, the numbers already are hard to make work nowadays. If we were hiring a property manager at 12% for long-term rentals, 30+% for short-term rentals, also hiring out any maintenance, all the heating, the cooling,
There's no profit.
weeds, we would be losing money. There's no way that it would make sense. So I think if you have one rental property and let's say it's netting $500 a month and you're getting $6,000 a year, well, what if the AC goes out? You've just lost over a year. And if you can't afford to maintain that property, it doesn't make sense.
Right.
Now, if you have 10 plus, that's when the numbers start to make sense, because some are going to lift other ones up.
Offset the others, yeah.
But if I could see why people wouldn't be attracted to being a property manager, especially for 1 or 2 properties,
Right.
because you're probably going to lose money until the end, you know?
Yep.
Right.
So, of course, at the very end, whenever you have a paid off house and
Right.
you might not have been paying as much for it, but you're definitely going to be paying into it. It's not going to be free.
Yeah.
I don't think. It's very hard to make those numbers work.
Yeah, unless you have some properties like Shannon has in her instance, where you acquired that property years and years ago, and the numbers really make sense. You got enough room.
Right.
Property manager makes sense. You can separate yourself. You can let them wear the black hat. You can wear the white hat, but you're not even really involved in the process at that point, other than checking on your property manager. Now, how important is that, Paul, to, you hire a property manager, go out and, watch your asset and whatnot. What do you expect from the property manager, and how often should you be popping up on their radar?
I think communication with the property manager is key. When you set up a property manager, talk about inspections and come up with a budget for maintenance. Like, I don't want to be called, and I had this conversation with Aspen a while back, I don't want to be called for every light bulb that burns out. I don't want to be called for every clogged toilet and all that stuff. Those are things that a property manager, if you're using one, should be doing. But I think communication is what I hear is the worst part of property management, at least in this town. You don't know what's going on. You're getting sometimes false reports. They're not doing inspections like they should. Come up with, like, all of a sudden you have a list of some pretty expensive repairs that need to be done, and these were maintenance items. Why weren't we done? I was charged for them, but they weren't done. So I think, getting somebody you can trust and somebody that communicates pretty regularly.
Yeah. And there's a lot of property managers here locally. And so if you are listening to this and you're thinking about hiring a property manager, interview them. I mean, that's a fair thing to do. Sit down and talk with them. We've got some really good property managers, and they're willing to take the time and sit down with you and go through what services they offer. I think communication is always an important, anywhere in real estate, communication really matters. So let's move into a speed round real quick. We just have a couple minutes. Should you manage your own rental or not? Shannon, I'm going to softball this one to you.
No.
That's an emphatic no.
That's not true. I think Aspen's correct. Like she said, there's things she can handle, and, she does well at it. And it's, know your boundaries.
Yeah.
Know what you can do.
Fair enough. Aspen.
I think you could manage your own properties for the most part. I think if you know I've gotten pushed over. I kind of get the bleeding heart a little bit. So, but I feel comfortable at some point being like, okay, enough's enough and it's time to move on. But so I think yes, but I know I will be getting a property manager whenever mine are paid off, because I won't want to deal with it anymore, and I'll have a little bit more cushion.
Yeah.
Yep. It's a progression. Melissa.
Learn and grow it as a business until you have learned what your weaknesses and strengths are. Learn and then pass it on to property manager. I think that's really the best thing to do. Unless you've got, loads and loads of cash that you can just pour out every month, without actually knowing your business. But I think that you should learn and grow your business.
Treat it like a business. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Paul, what are your thoughts?
It depends on how many you have. If it gets too much for you, property management, get help. Because at the end of the day, if you have happy tenants, then the business is going to go well. If you can't do it yourself, my brother-in-law and I are struggling doing it ourselves right now. But if you can't do it yourself, go to property management.
Yeah. And I think you're just right on the lines with Melissa in the sense that you're getting it to a point where you're running like a business, and then at a certain point you maybe hand it off there. But I think it's important that you understand the intricacies of being a property manager. And not only that, some of the things that you got to deal with in the legal world about non-discrimination, how to vet your tenants properly, how to navigate the vetting process and the application process without violating fair housing laws. Very important thing. So those are considerations you need to make if you want to roll your sleeves up and dive into being a property manager for your own properties. Wonderful. Good for you. But at a certain point, hiring it done professionally by a licensed broker is the way to go for a lot of people as well. So my thoughts are, if you're just starting out, learn the ropes, understand your business, and then at some point move it to a property manager. So thank you for that discussion. We're winding down on time. So you do want to stay tuned for our next episode because we're going to be talking about condos versus townhomes. What's the difference? Everyone thinks, well, I shouldn't say everyone, but a lot of people think condos and townhomes are the same thing. They are not. Very different balls of wax we got to deal with there. So if you like our episodes, please like our and subscribe to our YouTube channel, sign up and receive our newsletter, go like our Facebook page. We've got all kinds of great content that we're giving you. We're trying to provide as much value to this community that watches The Den because these are important issues and we like to help homeowners navigate this world, and we're here for you. So sign up for a consultation with any one of us here at the Lyons Group. We'd love to sit down with you and have a personal one-on-one. And until next time, we'll see you at The Den. Thank you for listening to The Den, powered by the Lyons Group. Hit the subscribe button to keep informed on real estate happenings. If you'd like to learn more about the Lyons Group, visit sjcbroker.com. Complex markets require complex strategies. The Lyons Group can give you a true advantage in any market. Whether you're buying or selling, residential or commercial, contact us directly at sjcbroker.com. We're time-tested experts with a client-first approach, and we'll see you next time in The Den.